So yes, some of you I know. Some of my best failures are in the room. I have been involved in education since I was 5, like several of you probably, and it's something that just fascinates me. And I guess one of the things that I've enjoyed is actually the whole notion of coaching. Most of my coaching's been at secondary school level, and then through to about under 18 reps. And that's been in basketball, as you can pick. I tried to make it with rugby, but I stood sideways at practice and they marked me absent. And the other is volleyball, but yeah, done track and field level 2 way back. And so yeah, I just have a love of coaching. And one of the things that I really want to try and push today is the educative role of coaching in terms of how coaching sits in relation to education, because one of the beefs I've had for many years is the power that science seems to hold in the coaching fraternity, which I think is fine in some respects, but in other aspects I think we lose a lot if we place too much emphasis on the science. So I'm going to take you through a fairly convoluted tour. Parts are going to be worked in metaphor, parts are going to be actually artistic, if you like. I have to apologise in advance that we don't have sound coming through the speakers up here. Unfortunately, if I'd known that, I'd have brought some with me, but you're going to have to listen a little bit harder to the internal speakers on the laptop. But I just wanted to start by getting you all to put in, having listened to your input this morning, I'd like you to respond to that no more than maybe 5 words. Away you go. You can choose 1 word if you like. I'm happy with 1. 1 is good.
Coaching is my happy place.
Okay.
Coaching is my art form.
Okay. Creating. Okay.
Helping players develop to the best of their ability.
A place to pass on knowledge. Helping athletes achieve their full potential. Sharing.
No lurkers allowed, you've got to all contribute.
Creating learning. Where my other world stops. Yeah, payment.
Any others?
And love.
Okay. Right. What have you noticed about the responses? You don't mind me talking with a minty?
I think they're all different.
All positive.
Yeah.
It's not about skill development.
Okay. Rich wouldn't like to hear you say that.
No, I mean like the answer to why we coach or what we think of coaching isn't about the technical. That's not the why behind what we do.
Yep. Would it be fair to say it's messy? Fluid? Unpredictable? Changeable? Personal? So, one of the problems we have with coaching is defining it, because it is so diverse, it's so amorphous. And yet, a lot of the time we try and turn it into a science. And so what I want to do is just get you to think a little bit wider today and play around with the idea, no pun intended, play around with the idea of just thinking about other ways that we can look at what this thing that we call coaching is that you're obviously very dedicated towards, from what I'm hearing. So let's just start with a little clip for you. Ra knows that this person is my hero, but I'm going to share him with you anyway. And if you listen hard, you might be able to hear it. Is there any way I can drop those front lights, or is it going to be all or nothing? That's good, thanks, Mark. I won't make you endure too much of Ludwig von Beethoven, but I love the pastoral. So the geezer up the front, Leonard Bernstein. He works from a score, a musical score, which we saw at the start of the clip. Is what he is doing as conductor up the front an objective behaviour?
What do you mean by objective behaviour?
Okay. If you've got a score, you interpret the score and you deliver it. So it wouldn't matter if Leonard Bernstein was there, or if it was you, or you, or you. If you were musicians, you were suitably qualified, etc., we would still hear the pastoral symphony conducted by whomever. So it's just like, there it is, deliver it. Much the same as you would have, for instance, a play. You have a script, don't you? And you work from that script.
Then no.
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think opposite.
I just think the personality of the interpretation gets thrown into the... So you're a flamboyant conductor, I guess, then you're going to be a little bit more looking for contrast between the sets and stuff.
Okay.
I think it's like any coach. You can have something written down, but when the delivery comes, the delivery will be completely different with every single coach. But the information is exactly the same. So working off of that, that's a sheet. Everybody gets a sheet that they want to interpret a coaching plan and deliver that coaching plan, but we'd all deliver it slightly different. And in certain instances, some players would respond stronger for how that's delivered in that, and he's doing exactly the same. His interpretation of that information he's delivering.
Both sound the same? Ah. So when you say all their work's done, what's the work?
All the coaching, all the preparation, everything they're doing, that's their performing.
But if you put a different conductor in and he held his arm up for 1 second longer, it would sound different.
I don't know how it would, but I'm just suggesting.
Yeah. No, but I think what Jaime said and what I said and what Brett said, we're actually saying the same things.
So does,
So it's
not a
not so much-
musician,
Yeah, we need
so
to
I don't understand, the person at the front, do the people
Now, there's an interesting thought, isn't it?
No, or are they just reading the music? Because if they're reading the music in front of them, like they all look like they're doing, then I'd say that person at the front has limited role to play. But if they're reading the music and engaging with the person at the front at the same time, then the role they play is important. But I don't understand music, so I don't know.
The conductor within this sort of controls basically the speed that some of them are going at. Like the speed gone with the arms, quite often that's the rhythm that the music's going at. And then sometimes if he wants something to go a little bit louder, he'll just lift his arm and they're watching the cues of the
So
person
here's
in
the
front.
puppeteer.
Here's the puppeteer.
Can't they say that on the score though?
But sometimes when the conductor will have a different interpretation on how things are going, and he'll see how it's actually sounding in front of him, and he'll go, okay, that's sounding a little bit quieter than what I'm wanting, so he'll lift it up, and it's basically trying to get, say, in an orchestra, 40 odd people, individuals, trying to come together as
Yeah, like
one coherent sound.
When they sing the national anthem, you can get two different singing the same words, but it's going to come out differently depending on their spin or take on it. But we
So
don't
it's
have
like a DJ being able to
Yes.
turn you
Yeah.
down, turn you up,
It's,
Surely
put a
that's
little
what
bit of a
was-
beat
it's
over
like
it.
moving,
There wouldn't be a job.
it's like moving the bass and the treble and all that sort of thing on when you're on synthesizer and all that sort of thing, and try to get that perfect sound from the perspective of the person controlling it.
If the score says PP, pianissimo, very soft, then what does that mean?
Very soft.
Everybody has to interpret what does very soft mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So are we saying then that in this situation, no?
Yes.
Anyone want to hold fire on the objective in terms of wouldn't matter? So if we took Leonard away and we just said to the orchestra, okay, you go, you play it, and then yes, we brought in Leonard's understudy and they took over.
To an uneducated, I probably wouldn't know the difference. I mean, I could probably listen to 5 different conductors with the same group of people and not hear the difference. But
Yep.
but I think I agree with Sean a little bit. The outcome is generally the same. The fine little points might be slightly different, but to me, and I would suggest a lot of people you wouldn't know.
And I think preparation would be really important. Like you'd know before you went out and delivered that.
Because an orchestra of this level compared to a child's orchestra that's just starting out as well.
And those children are just going to be ready.
no, to be fair, what we're seeing here is pretty much, it's no different to having a coach and a team. Once they get out there, quite often it's everything has been done beforehand, getting in the different plays and all that sort of thing. He's just there kind of as a backup type sort of situation. They know what he's wanting. They already know what is going to happen, and he's just doing the fine-tuning stuff as the things gone along. We like in say, a basketball game coming off. Okay, you guys need to just quickly do this type of thing in the middle as they go on things and go out there, but the prep's already been done.
Okay, so usually between 60 and 80 instruments in a symphony orchestra, particularly if it's got a good budget. 60 and 80 musicians. So about 30 different instruments, and obviously they're in the 4 groups, brass, woodwind, etc. So the score, for instance, we know is something like 47 minutes. So you've got basically 80 to 100 people in 4 different groups, 30 different instruments, playing for 47 minutes and getting to the end point together. And all the way through, you've got to be basically demonstrating synchronicity. In other words, you're all on the same page, literally, as far as the score goes. Incredibly complex. And how on earth does Leonard Bernstein manage to stand up there and do that? How does he manage to get everybody to that last, bar after 47 minutes without a single error? And I think that's the big challenge if we jump over the fence and think, is that as complex as coaching is?
I think that is exactly, he is
It is coaching. That's why I've used it. Yeah, exactly. So the things that you've been talking about this morning in your preliminary discussion, etc., probably highlight the fact that you know, it's incredibly complex, and there are a huge number of things, and you may not have that many variables to worry about, but you'll still have a huge amount. It's incredibly complex. And so, you know, we're hearing this morning in your discussions all the different aspects of the role of coaching, all right, and how you actually have to attend to each of those things and juggle, etc. There's a real art to it, isn't there? And so whilst we can grill you and we can participate with you in this room here, the things that you've been talking about out there, grounded in the real world, are what coaching is really all about. All we can do is try and introduce some different ideas and get you thinking in different ways. But your world in your particular area with the people that you work with is what it's really all about. So that's what we've got to try and look at, is how is this actually appreciated? How do we actually participate in this? All right? So yes, Leonard Bernstein can make decisions. He can make decisions about the overall pace, the overall tempo, right? The timbre, the quality, whether he wants more from a brass section at a particular time or less from the woodwind section at a particular time. My wife and I watched Whiplash on Friday night. Have anyone here seen Whiplash, the movie? Jazz musicians? Oh, get it out, it's great. It's amazing. And there's a guy who's basically out of control as a coach. It's just fascinating. And he's a conductor, but he's a jazz conductor. And it's just, yeah, it's coaching by fear.
Sorry, could I ask, does he have any, in regards to the 4 sections, does he have any sort of leading with those sections also? Break it down, so the part, you know, so that section knows what it needs to do for those 47.
Yes, they do. Yes, he would have different sessions with each of the groups. Absolutely, yeah. Usually there's a person in charge of each group within that group, all right? But generally he will have them practicing in different groups, and then they will come together and they'll spend a huge amount of time because there is so many, there is so much. But yeah, good question, right? But yes, although there is a score.
He can coach whilst the final execution's happening, but someone like myself, I'm not allowed to speak to my pupils.
Absolutely. So all the hard work has to be done beforehand, whether you like it or not. Yeah. And in this situation, that's pretty much the same too. Because in the performance, you just got to go on no matter what.
Why does he need to be there?
So it's interpreted, isn't it? There's an interpretation. Interpretation is subjective. So it's not an objective behaviour. Okay? So what's the art in his role? There he is up there on the pedestal with his baton, and away he goes. What's artful about what Bernstein does and how he does it?
I suppose he's bringing it all together. So realistically, all 4 of those units know exactly what they need to do at the precise time to get the end outcome, which is obviously a beautiful piece of music that people want to listen to.
Okay.
The art is the processes that he follows.
Good.
Right leading up to that point, So
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's massively complex because it comes back to
Incredibly
his
complex.
understanding of that
Yep.
in different parts.
It's the trust that that he has built up to that, because he can do whatever he likes up the front, but they don't trust that what he's doing is right. They can still do their own.
They could. Yeah, as we've already said, we could take Bernstein out of the picture, and yes, the orchestra would still play the piece because they know it so well, and they are performers.
And art is about interpretation too,
Absolutely.
and he's the head interpreter of the piece.
Yeah, because we know that if, for instance, we went into the CD store and we looked under Beethoven and we flicked through and pulled out the 6th Symphony, there might be 4 different CDs there, and we could play all of them, and every one of us would pick up differences. There's no doubt about that, you know. The pace or the tempo at different times would be different. There'll be certain times where you can just tell, you know, it's just different. It sounds different. So it is a matter of interpretation. And he has the license to do that. Basically, that's the musical industry saying to him, you can do this however you want to. We want to hear what your interpretation is. Conversely, Bernstein's saying, this is how the pastoral should sound, according to me. Okay? So how do those characteristics align with what it is that you do?
Straight in line, because a lot of the main coaching that I do is subjective judging, and so therefore it's about interpretation of how a horse is going to ride and that type of thing. It's not cut and dry, black and white, time faults, you're out.
Okay?
In rugby, very similar with you've got all those different individuals that have all different work-ons and positives, and then they have to work in their mini units, and then they have to work in their 4-pack bags, and you have to get those to work together, all in a succinct way to maximise the potential of the group by maximising the potential of each individual.
Okay. Good.
Intuition, like coach, because like, you know, the saxophone might be having a bad day. So
He might. Yep. As an ex-sax player, I can relate to that.
Yeah, but it's like, yeah, you need to, read what's happening or
Yep, good comment. Any other thoughts?
I just think the level of subjectivity is different, maybe with some sport environments, because you have a game plan, but it's not, you don't read it, you know, not literally read it, but it's not, I must pass now, and then I must catch now, and I must run, you know, like there's probably a little bit more subjectivity in some sporting contexts.
Even as the coach, the ability to see what in the game, so you've done all the prep up to it, to see what's happening within the defence and manipulate what you're doing on attack on the spot to counteract the beat. Like that would be similar, like the ability of the coaches to communicate with their people on the field, and for them to have enough coaching within that to trust the decision made by the coaching team to make that change and go through with it based on what the wider eye is seeing.
Mm-hmm.
But you need the trust of your players for them to follow through with those changes.
Buy into it. Yep. Well, good. We're happy. It's a good day. Be happy. The French are gone. All right, here's a continuum. All right. Now, this is not Saturday night lotto draw. This is actually dealing with numbers in a very considered way. So at this end of the continuum, we have art. And whatever we mean by that term. And by art, I mean art with a capital A, as in the arts. Right? Something that is artistic, etc. And at the other end, we've got science. So you all know the scientific aspects of coaching. You all know the scientific principles that you call on, that you employ when you do your coaching, and what that's all about. So it might be to do with, physiological principles. It might be to do with biomechanical principles. It might be to do with motor skill work and learning. That's basically our sciences. That's the science of coaching. And in days gone by, I would be in this room with Mark, and we would be learning Coaching New Zealand Level 2. And usually it was about probably, what do you think, Mark? 80%, 90% sports science? Yeah. Those days are gone. We've moved on. Hallelujah. So between these two terms, we've got our numbers. So here's your lotto draw, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to position yourself as far as your world and your interpretation and your coaching is concerned. If you think it is significantly and very close to almost a saturated version of art, then you select one. On the other hand, if you think it's very much a scientific process, and you cannot live without science in your coaching world, then you need to select 10. But I'm going to give you now just a couple of minutes to think, reflect on where you think you sit on that continuum and be prepared to support your selection. Anyone not sure what I'm after?
It's just the interpretation of an artiste.
It's
Are we actually
no, this is
talking
the
about
interpretation
flair
of,
or the-
according to your world of coaching, is science or art what it's all about, in your perspective and in your coaching world?
I'm struggling to find out what art is as a definition in relation. I understand about the science
Yep,
that adds supposedly knowledge and value to the
yep.
coaching. What's the art bit?
The art is fluid, the art is subjective, the art is ineffable, hard to put to words. The art is the unsure. The art is the fluid.
Right.
All right?
Okay.
So, for instance, anything to do with non-science is art. Pick a number. Any number. Half increments are allowed. Another way of looking at it is science is certain, art is uncertain, isn't it? If you and I are standing there looking at a print on the wall, we're both going to have a view on it, aren't we? But there's no hard and fast rule as to how we should respond to that print. There are no facts. Whoops. How are we going? Who wants to throw a number out? Okay. 3? Three because?
Oh, I just take it at the more I like to get the physiological side of the science of hockey.
Yeah.
But on the field, if you put too much numbers and stuff, you take away the flair of players.
Right.
Hockey, for example, is really number orientated and trying to work out how well a players play. They put numbers to a player, and players are scared to make mistakes, so the flair's gone.
All right.
That's nuts.
Plausible. There's no wrong answer here, team, so don't be worried about speaking up.
6.
6?
Yeah, 5.56.
I'm on the same board because our my particular one is subjective judging and it's an art form and it's expression. But one of the reasons I'm here is to learn more about the science and controlling brain and that.
Shall I pack up at this stage?
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. 'Cause I mean, a while ago, I probably would have gone more towards a 3.
Yeah.
So I think it is, growth, either direction. And I'd say, can I change mine to a solid 5?
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
No extra charge for changing.
I know.
Okay, so we got a 3, a 6 and a 5.
I've gone for a 3 as well. I think all of my planning is based on science. Like if I plan my sessions, it's based on what I know. But in terms of my actual coaching, if I run one session plan, if I ran it 10 times, it'd be different every time because you're reacting to how the players interpret your instruction. So your line of questioning and your key points will change dependent on that. Yeah, that's what I'm.
Yep. Well, you're dealing with an objective measure there, aren't you, which is time. You've got a practice which is over a certain period of time, and we know that time is objective. I mean, an hour is an hour, a minute is a minute, whether we like it or not. We'd like it sometimes to be more or less in our real worlds, particularly probably when you are coaching, but in essence, that's what it comes down to. Yeah, good call.
I had three as well. More of the creative, flexible side, but also the belief, self-belief. Like, it pushes me more that way, because if you haven't got that, then you have all sense of the world.
Okay.
Right, I'm going for an 8. Trampolining, you need to have the biomechanics, you need to have the physiology, everything. If you don't have that, it can't look pretty. I started thinking towards 7 or 6 because it is a subjective sport, but it won't look beautiful or pretty unless you have the actual elements correct mechanically.
Yeah, what if you've got all the elements, but you haven't necessarily got the athlete?
What do you mean by that?
Well, maybe the athlete that you're working with is a totally different kettle of fish to another athlete that you'd be working with. Is it still an 8 in terms of you applying the biomechanical work, etc.?
You can't do the skills if you don't have the biomechanical correct.
So are we assuming that the athlete, irrespective of who they are, learns those skills the same way at the same pace?
No, not necessarily. That's why I'm not going for a 10.
This would apply, change on each person. Like you get feel writers, over analytical writers, and so like we all know, we change our words. And when I'm teaching a feel writer, close your eyes, feel what's going on. If we've got an analytic over talker, I sit with them. Let's tell me what you're feeling, or let's think about what I've said.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
each number would essentially might change.
I've got some that would be 9 or 10. I've got some that would be 7 or 6, but predominantly for trampolining, if you want to be successful,
You're down here.
getting the science of it right.
Okay.
If you can't get the science right, the biomechanical side of it right, you fall off the edge of the trampoline. Simple.
But are we talking about the coaching, not the athlete?
We are talking about the coaching,
I have to teach. I have to teach the science of it correctly.
but the coaching is of the athlete, isn't it? Any other goes? Crystal?
Yeah. For me, the technical side of it forms the base, but the art is what wins championships. Like that, I think I can build an athlete that passes and catches and makes knows the game plan and the move, but it's the building of the team and the culture and the relationships within it, and making the individual feel like they can achieve and be the best they can. That's the difference between championships and not. So I think the science is about the science and the body and the ability to do the technical. You won't win a championship, but you can't just have that. So I don't know where the hell that sits, but I think that join our group. I think you can't have one without the other. For me personally, as a coach, they go hand in hand, and where it moves between the two as it needs to.
Okay.
So
let's look at it a slightly...
It depends on the individual too.
The individual as in the coach?
Individual is the athlete.
Okay.
So I think, to me, you go back and forward, and it depends on where you are with the athlete and what level the athlete is. So I think as a coach, you're always going like this.
Agreed.
And that's why I'm struggling to put myself where I want to be, because you float from one side to the other side. And the problem is, I think, as we were talking about before, the sports psychologists or sports scientists came in with all this stuff, and everyone went that way. And what Hyman was saying, the black sticks now is focus too much around the science, so the individual player and that has sort of disappeared. So, but I think we always as coaches need to be
Toggling.
Have all the tools in the kit. You do, you need them.
So I'll be naughty and I'll go to be 5.
You're allowed to be a 5. What if we changed it slightly and said rather than having a continuum, you positioned them side by side, or one on top of the other, or one being subjugated by the other, taken over by? Where would you position the two then? Would they be exactly married side by side?
On top of each other.
On top of each other?
I think it would depend on the scenario too, of what you're dealing with.
And
because-
even again, it depends on the athlete.
Yeah.
It's like you, I'm just thinking about some of the ones that I've dealt with. I've got, like, say, go distance side of things with pace judgment.
Yeah.
You've got some kids that come out there and they just not. It's just innate in their personality. And then you've got others that basically it's as foreign as French. And so the ones where it's innate, you probably would basically allow them to trust their feelings. Where the ones where they can be oblivious on how to actually do it, you'd probably have to go more towards the science type thing to actually teach them how to do it.
Uh-huh.
So it's establishing trust. Yeah.
So what is X factor of science or an art?
The X factor?
Ah,
I would have said an art.
Isn't that when you go?
However,
not always. You get a whole bunch of them together.
I think the problem is, as
it's not a problem.
No, but I think you need to be exactly aware where everybody is in, and there's no right or wrong, but you're going to be aware that actually some of these individual players may need a little bit more recognition in the science area, and you can aid that with the knowledge that you've been given. I think people take it literally. So it's like somebody comes on a course, and as you experienced all them many years ago, your interpretation was, this is what has to be done.
Yeah.
So then you go away and you sort of work around that because your knowledge base is no wider. So you think that everything that's actually said is correct.
Yep.
Then as you become more experienced and wiser, you actually start to recognise, well, actually it's not an exact science, and you can't always just tick the box exactly as you want it.
Okay.
You have to be aware of all of the areas. Science will help, as will artistic impression. And we as coaches just need to recognise that we'll actually be aware of both areas. I think when you start pigeonholing and saying, well, actually, I'm only going to be interested in science, or now I'm going to jump that artistically, I've got to put that into the mix. For certain individuals, I think it will aid their development and
I've been
moving
part of
forward.
a team that's been like superstar team, all athletes, got the best moves, and we haven't had, the culture has not been built where we have a belief we'll work our asses off for each other and put the team first, and we have not won. But on paper, we should have won. And then I've been part of a team where we have had the best feeling and best vibe in the world, but we didn't have the technical skill to pull it off, and we also haven't won. So
Yep.
I think it's the art is the building the culture and the vibe and people believe in the science. You need both, I think. if you
Okay.
want to do the best.
I saw one day now looking and thinking about it, probably a 1, because you need to be the master of the science.
Sorry, Gary, I'm with you, because I think I reckon about 2, because I reckon the science are the 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Because science, to me, in my mind, is the sports science.
All right.
If you look at golfers, golfers can have biomechanically the worst.
And some of them do.
Some do, but
Yeah.
they go and be the best in the world.
Yep.
But their processes and everything enable them to execute that repetitively under pressure.
Yeah. Arnold Palmer had one of the worst golf swings in the world.
Same with tennis.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot of other individual sports
Yep.
particularly well. But
I came across a little ditty that I'm going to share with you in a moment, which sort of segues nicely into this, where the discussion's at the moment. But I think one of the things that we have to just keep in mind is, well, when we're talking about art or the artistic side of the continuum, etc., what does that include? Because a lot of the time what we interpret art to be or science to be is what we're including under that. So again, there's almost like a double whammy or a double interpretation. So, you know, in each and every one of your minds, for instance, there is this understanding of what art is, or what, and that was the question that you asked, what do you mean by this? And I mean, that's what makes coaching so fascinating for a lot of us, is that, you know, it all comes down to our personal experiences and our personal interpretations. And that's what perhaps makes it an art form. However, there are a lot of scientific principles that we must have that are part of what, you know, coaching is about. We know that. So, you know, if we don't understand the technical side of our sport, then what can we actually do for our sport or for our athletes? It's just a case of, yeah, where we position ourselves and what we think something means. Here's an example. So David Whedon's Aussie Rules coach, very highly regarded in Australia. And I'll give you a moment to have a look at that. But I think the little comment up the top here, the fundamental definition of the role of the coach has not changed in 30 years. So what people do hasn't changed. All right? It remains and always will remain to improve individual and team performance. Okay? Now, the role of the coach hasn't changed, but the coaches have. The role of the coach hasn't changed, but the coaches have. And if you think about that in terms of, you know, perhaps the amount of time you have spent in your sport, etc., I'm sure you can probably think of examples where that would apply. So, for Toby, for instance, you know, when I think of hockey, I think of C.V. Walter, because I was brought up in Christchurch, and I had a good mate that played in C.V. Walter's team. C.V. Walter just stood down at the end of the field with a fag hanging out of his mouth just about the entire game, and he would give these big, long, philosophical team talks. And the Meister brothers, and I can't remember who else was in that squad, but I mean, they were invincible in those days. And I always wondered, you know, what is it that C.V. Walter takes those guys inside and talks to them for an hour before the game? What is it that he says and does that allows that to happen? Well, I'm not sure how C.V. Walter would get on today, but you know, the fact is that coaches still coach, but they probably don't coach the way C.V. Walter did. And you could probably think of examples in your own sport. So what has changed? I mean, in rugby, there's no way that people coach like Grizz Wiley used to now, as far as I'm aware, but I'm happy to be proved wrong on that or pulled up on it. So, Whedon is saying that coaching is an art based on a science. So before, when I was asking you about positioning, this is what he thinks. Whether or not you agree with that, that's entirely up to you.
I do agree with that, but I think it's a bit demoralising because I think the best coaches that I've ever had are the people who do that really well, regardless of their knowledge of something, because they recognise their weaknesses, they draw on other people, they get the best out of players. But then, I don't know, kind of, those people are quite rare. You know what I mean? Like, you find people who really actually understand people and can communicate things and have great interpersonal, can relate well to a diverse group of people.
You'll be one of those people to someone, a group of people. You'll be that person that you've described that you thought was weird to you.
Yeah, well, I think
you'll be that to me.
I think there is a number of people in this room that are like that, but I think it is still quite rare. You know what I mean? I think the ability to do that is, you know, why do we have coaching courses? What?
I think teachers are pretty similar in that
You know, you look at, this is just
It's
teaching.
about interpretation too, it's about assessment, it's about assessing the individual and the team in front of you, and then assessing your situation and, you know, conducting the plan.
I think it's being around where people like it, like they're
Motivated.
the same as what you described, and you pass that on to kids, and then you'll pass it on to your kids, and it's the ability to, for other people to be around them and learn it. I think it's as much of a learned art form as well as one that you perform it, because it's through having those coaching experiences and seeing someone perform like a coach in that light, you know, and John is running my coaching development as well, that you learn how a good team works,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go on and do it yourself.
And yet, probably 9 out of 12 people in that same team will not take that away. You know, because they just don't have that ability to recognise that that was what was special. It wasn't the technical knowledge, it was just that ability to bring everything together.
But some of that
Grab
happens
those three.
but some of that happens with their experiences of going through different coaches. They only know once they've actually experienced what are potentially stronger coaches and weaker coaches. And through that experience, they actually then recognise, well, actually, what was being said 5 years ago by that
12.
now makes a hell of a lot of sense, but at the time, I didn't understand it. So therefore, and it's like everything else, we'll all interpret what the art of coaching is. Maybe on any one day, somebody gets a group together, does very little what you would term old-fashioned thought, goes back to the old-fashioned ways of just get the group having a great time and it works. Somebody else comes in, wants to actually change that, and the dynamics completely change, and therefore then they can't get the best out of that group, and that's the difficulty, I suppose. But there's different ways of
A lot of that will be artificial too, because it'll be attributed to success. And, you know, you look at a lot of this literature and all this around, you know, often you just see screeds and screeds of quotes from people that have ultimately been part of successful teams, or they've been head of the tree in a successful team. That's not always where the true learnings are. That's, you know, well, that's not what I'm thinking of. Of course they are, but it's not always. So,
Well, I mean, you can get really effective coaches who coach losing teams over that same recognition.
well, it's just where the spotlight pointed at the time. But it's easy to point the spotlight on what the All Blacks do, because they've got an 87%. And there's a reason for that. But there's a lot of reasons why, when you see what goes on in New Zealand rugby, as to why that team consistently wins over other teams.
So it's culture. Good culture.
Well, I think that's part of it, is the culture, isn't it? And, I think, like, when I was at school, I was very fortunate that I had Graham Henry as my coach for 4 years when I was at school, and coached the first 15. And, you know, and I reflect back and you look at the communication. So before every game, Graham would go around and speak to us individually about what we were going to do in the game and what he wanted us to try and actually do to make us better players. You know? And that's the sort of thing. And then we'd have the team talk before we'd go out in the field, and we knew what the tactics were. We knew what we were going to do when we were playing against Alabama, you know, against a different team. So, you know, yeah, underlying that, I think that's the culture we develop. It's each of those have an important part playing of how to attain that excellence.
Does that happen at that high level, and that's like I think has been playing on my mind recently? Will I be able to recreate a culture like this at a high level in that area? It's like the time constraints are different, the buy-in from a young girl compared to on the verge of being contracted woman And that's what I was asking, could you recreate that culture at that high level, and how much harder is that going to be?
Yep, yep.
Because at the end of the day, everyone still wants to dream big and love what they're doing and have fun while performing well, but, you know.
I think campaign coaching is different to, you know, like a team for a whole season. That's a whole new set of skills, I think, that takes special people to build really quickly within a short campaign, compared to if you start with them kind of for 25 weeks as opposed to.
So just throwing it out there, I don't know if you guys all realize this, if I can't remember if I said this in the beginning, but I'm teaching in excess of 350 people a year. So that means I've got to line up and assess what I've got in front of me quite quickly. And this is really relevant to, I'm back on the scale again. Is it an art form or is it a science?
What are you trying to achieve?
Well, so that they don't hurt themselves, basically. And some riders, I'm there for a specific purpose. They're training for competition, or I'm just, you know, done a big team culture for a campaign. You know, they're very different avenues when I, you know, come to a venue for different reasons. So it could be any number of them. But my program that I coach is really consistent all the way through, but I just adapt it to what they need. So maybe it is art.
So you can change it to 2.
There are four mentions of art in that quote. All right, so we've got art of communication, art of engagement, art of motivating, and the art of bringing together a diverse group.
So the choices you can get substitute that word for
Skill.
Science and communication, science and engagement, science.
It's a fair question. My question was going to be, what's missing? Or is there anything missing? Whether it's a science or an art? You would think,
About bringing a diverse group together, for me it's individuals. My kids compete on their own.
But do they train together?
But it doesn't matter where they train.
Don't you think? Don't you think you can build a culture of
Well, yeah, we
communication?
do, but it's not 100% crucial to, it's not like a netball team or a
But
track
if they
team.
enjoy their training environment and they're motivated by
Oh, yeah,
that,
totally.
that will affect.
Oh, absolutely, but some of them are so focused, they will train. If there's a spot they will train, they don't care who's there. So, yeah, training, we do team building, especially at this time of year when we've got new people joining the competitive program, but it's not always groups as well. Sometimes, you know, some people are in an individual sport because they don't like being part of the group. I've got one little girl who's not interested in talking to anybody else. She just likes sitting along, doing her thing and going home. We've tried everything. She's not worried about it. She's absolutely content just coming in, training, talking to me. She talks to the other kids, but she goes up and does her thing and happy go.
But even within that, the way that you communicate, the way that you engage, and the way that you motivate within that, to hopefully then bring a
Oh yeah,
sort of
that's
together
fine.
for yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's where I say, where we talk about the art, well actually it's your interpretation of how you communicate with that individual, rather than actually, and maybe without recognising it, it's, you know, certain things it's called an art, but yeah. So.
If I made her sit there and do things off the rest of the group, she wouldn't come back.
But you therefore wouldn't have a very good art of engagement with her.
With her, I
because, yeah, but if you
Yeah.
did that,
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
which
Yeah.
is
any other comments before we break for lunch, Mark? Is that this?
Yeah, lunch is there ready.
Okay.
I was just going to work out, like, those 3 things, the communication, engagement and motivating, that's a little bit of emotional intelligence skill, isn't it?
Yep.
Science or is it art?
It's related.
sorry,
Yeah.
what was that?
Those 3 things are a little bit emotional intelligence.
That's what you do when you do sports psychology.
Feeling
people.
So you
Yeah,
want, I'm
although a lot of them, for instance, I mean, if you were to take engagement for what? And what happens after engagement? So there might be some emotional intelligence involved there, but you can still plan or you can still present to create engagement, but what's happening after that? Right? So for instance, my long-term agenda might be to get you to think about the notion of an engagement because I want you to do certain behaviours or think in certain ways further down the track. It may not actually be trying to get you engaged here and now. It might be just, you're out there driving in the car at some stage and you suddenly think, yada, 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 yada. So I guess, it's like everything else. There's a whole lot of interpretations around this. And we have to be careful that we don't make it too simplistic. But more importantly, we actually just start to play around with them in our heads.